You can throw anything at me. I like
But
I it's easy for me to like talk about like think about things on the fly.
okay, but yeah. For those for those that don't know, this is John Eric. He is a author from here up here in Washington, and he just recently wrote a book called Return to Poe. I have right here, and then it's a great read. And so here I'll let him. Not only has he written a great book, but he's also an amazing runner as well. But without further ado, how you doing today, John?
Good. Yeah, it's fun to finally do this, and
Yeah.
we've talked about the book a little bit, and
Mhm.
gone on some runs and had some good chats, and this is kind of a fun new medium for us to be
Yeah.
talking. So I'm excited for that. And like now, COVID's been going on for almost a year now,
Yeah.
and it's like Zoom is like second nature, right? It's like
Yeah. It
basically how we
has.
hang
Yeah.
out with everybody these days. So it's fun. It's fun to finally connect with you, Kyle, over the virtual landscape.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is interesting. Yeah, this is great being able to finally connect and meet up where we.
That's sort of the beginning of this whole um, endeavor that ended with writing a book.
Mhm.
But yeah, I got into conservation in Hawaii. Is basically where it started
Mhm.
a number of years ago, about 5 years ago. That's when I first moved out there.
Oh,
I I didn't initially move out for conservation, but I had a little bit of background studying conservation and biology in college.
okay.
That I like integrated into my interdisciplinary degree.
Hmm.
And so I was very much interested in finding opportunities for work in the conservation field.
Yeah.
But I was also sort of dancing around and getting into um, the other things I was interested in, which was education, environmental education, and like sort of like leading groups into nature or connecting people to nature is really what I was interested in doing, fostering relationships with nature and building, personal identity around nature, and that being a foundation for sort of like a people's sense of responsibility or social responsibility, and how to be active in one's community and give back to one's community, like using nature as kind of a teacher for learning about how we are a part of something larger than ourselves. and
Yeah.
and and so like yeah, so Hawaii is a pretty incredible place for that. There's a lot of energy and attention and consciousness sort of surrounded by those types of aspects of how one not only sees the world but interacts with it. And so I was naturally attracted to go over to Hawaii and immerse myself in that culture.
Yeah, and you definitely see that in your book where you reference a lot of the native terms and you really describe like their ecosystem specifically, like how delicate it really is over there. And you seem to do it in a really interesting and fascinating detail from everywhere from the how like the birds like the albatross and the smaller ducklings to all the way up to how the various plants kind of take advantage of their environment. Um, and so I was wondering like, but yeah, but I found that really interesting as well. Like you seem to bring it all together in an amazing cohesive book, and I love how you describe each and every section of that. So did that specifically, did all that conservation, and just seeing how Hawaii's kind of ecology that inspired you to essentially go up to what you do now of educating people, wanting to help out, educate people to be more aware of not only Hawaii but also to a wide people as wide of an audience as possible.
Yeah, I say so. Yeah, I'm always trying to figure out how to build bridges between disciplines,
Hmm.
and how to create movement across those bridges
Yeah.
as much as possible. And so that, that typically means like how do you reach a wider audience, or what are the audiences for these different disciplines?
Hmm.
Um, and I think one thing that tends to happen in human systems
Hmm.
is we we find ourselves training ourselves and building our skills and our professions for very uh, specialized types of work,
Yeah.
and so we call those like an industry, and that's sort of how the modern society especially is premised off of, like, very specialized skilled workers. um, and it's it we have the technology now and the communication systems that allow that to uh, function in a very, like, efficient way. But what I'm, like, kind of started to observe through my own studies and through my own sort of personal journey of diving into a lot of wilderness experiences,
Hmm.
and into different cultural um, communities, is that can create a kind of limiting perspective on the world, on how to live. And so I was intrigued by that, not in the sense of, like, criticizing the modern era, but more so to see what other experiences are out there, what other human systems are kind of co-inhabiting this modern space, and
Right.
time. And so, fast forward to now, I wrote this book, and writing this book is kind of, I would say, probably the the biggest, like, my biggest attempt at building one of those bridges.
Right.
And writing has been a tool for me to always integrate my own thoughts and experiences, and to synthesize things into something that feels cohesive and articulate. And so I thought, why not now, like, take this writing to another level and actually write a book that is published, enter that world, enter the publishing world,
Yeah.
and put that out there, um, for the world to see and participate in. And so this became sort of like a new, exciting endeavor. And I wanted that, like, what I really wanted from that is going back to this idea of, um, who is your audience? Who are you trying to work with, right? Who are you collaborating with in the world? And so this book, I'm trying to, I think, right,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
I'm trying to connect to different audiences, right, that are here and there and everywhere. And I want the book to be something that everyone can sort of connect to. Um, and the challenge, though, is that what I'm doing is I'm writing. It's a personal memoir,
Yeah. Okay.
right? It's a nonfiction. It's about my life and the 5 years, or it fits sort of within the 5 years that I lived in Hawaii. And they're personal essays. There's a little bit of a timeline, but not really. It's kind of vague. What happened when, and there's some weird framing that occurs. Like, it's not really, like, that's not really the intention with the book, but it
Mhm.
is more like a series of personal essays, drawing different themes that all sort of have to do with why is it important that we are taking time and energy in our own lives to connect to this other than human world.
Right.
And hopefully that's what comes across in the book.
Yeah, you do make a lot of good connections with that, and at least from my perspective of reading the book, the timeline, it does seem pretty clear. Like, you started 2013, and with yeah, after when you go out for your initial conservation trip, and after your brother very sadly passed away, and I think and then just you see that the timeline of you trying to connect all those dots with trying to trying to work your way through and accepting, and reflecting on you and your brother's relationship. It is interesting to see like all the different aspects of like you piecing everything together and all the little observations that all the different observations. Like it was like when you went to Oahu for a little bit and then seeing the shell shock of that, like how I guess industrial Oahu is versus out in nature.
Yeah.
I guess like so it's interesting to just kind of piece all of that together. I think it worked really well. One question I guess when you started going through this book, did you discover where you became more of a spiritual person through this whole trip, or?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the books, it takes place in my 20s, and we all know that the 20s is a very very much a time in our lives where we're really trying to seek out something, right? And for many, that's like that can take many forms, and that's something I love about like speaking about spirituality, right? Is that it can be something in which one is just trying to like find themselves, right? And yeah, so I got really into post college sort of studying human developmental stages, less from like a developmental science perspective and more from a what would you call it, like a multicultural perspective, borrowing a lot from different indigenous perspectives, and became really fascinated at simultaneously sort of examining human life stages. And then also sort of like, it's always contextual, right? We're always seeing it through the lens of whatever stage we are in at that moment. And so really what it was is, so when I first moved to Hawaii, I started working at a wilderness therapy program. And I was like a program guide or a counselor. And at that program, this was a program for young adults and adolescents who would come to the program who were dealing with some issue in their life, and sometimes it was something along the lines of severe anxiety or depression, and just that being very dysfunctional, or it could be something like very deviant behavior, and uncooperative, and needing to have to like enter into sort of an intervention type of situation where you're sent off to this program to get your act together. So across a wide spectrum, and I think I was really attracted to this sort of work because I myself was very cognizant at that point of that I was entering a new stage of development, the stage that we often call independence, right? And so it's but I really wanted to sort of dive deeper, but I've never sort of been one to be that studious. Like I'm a very hands-on type of person. Experiential is the name of the game for me.
Yeah, you are.
I just wanted to work in an environment where I could see that sort of happening. And I did a little bit of that work before up in the Appalachian Mountains, working at a outdoor education center where they had a relationship with a foster care system down in Miami City, where kids who grew up or were in the foster care system, could apply to come and hang out in the Appalachian Mountains in the woods for a week to two, and we would sort of teach them through nature, about themselves. And so for me, like going to Hawaii and diving into the world of these adolescents and young adults that were struggling to sort of enter into the inevitable stage of adulthood, right?
Yeah.
And I write about this in my book, right? There's a chapter called Waves of Waimanu, where I sort of I go on this hike with my friend, and I'm sort of reflecting on the work I'm doing as a mentor program guide in this therapy program. And I'm coming to this realization that I am trying to mentor these youth on and guide them and facilitate them through a experience that will help them come into their own independence. And realizing like I'm not there yet. I haven't done the work. I haven't initiated myself. I haven't had a rites of passage. What the hell am I doing? Trying to like, and then I start to feel that like imposter syndrome type stuff. And so that was a big like I'd call it like a spiritual awakening. And to me, what that means to me really, I'd say like if I was to define like one spirituality, it's confronting yourself through honesty, right?
That's the way to put it.
And it's a journey, right? So it's not like you wake up and you're like, oh, I know who I am now. No. It's oh, I'm aware that I don't really know, and I want to find out, and I'm going to be as truthful and honest with myself through that process. And I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm probably going to be led, down different roads. But I'm going to take that element of life and I'm going to make it more central to the way that I live. I'm going to be, introspective. I'm going to be self-aware. I'm going to be mindful and conscious of who I am and how I show up in the world.
I like the way you put that. I like the way you put that. That actually makes a lot of sense. Just becoming aware, and I kind of going back to what you said earlier about all this industrialization and people trying to specify. I think of like what they want to do for their for a various industry. I think a lot of people kind of try and almost lose that a little bit of self-inflection, like see who they are first, because they're so focused on trying to achieve an industry or
it doesn't leave much space, right, to do that, like that introspective work. And it almost feels like there's that well, I don't know what we call practice, or that experience is just, there's not much room for it. We kind of like get like shoved right into, college, if that's your route, or, some kind of like furthering education, or maybe it's just your profession. And it's not to say that one can't go through that journey integrated with their professional development and their career goals and values. Like that can very much be a part of it.
Absolutely.
But it's a matter of like, how are we as a culture or society, how are we allowing and permitting and valuing for citizens of a society to, like, how is that a part of the clarity mindset of becoming an adult? What does it mean to be an adult? What does it mean to transfer from being an adolescent, where you are coming from a dependent state, both legally and biologically, and sociologically, right? So, how are you transforming from that to an adulthood, and how are we sharing as a society what that transformation entails, right? What are the elements? how are we communicating that to the psyche of the individual, to the individuality
Of
of
course, yeah.
that person?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. And so, okay, yeah. So the whole Brahma thing I had,
Yeah,
essentially that whole spiritual question we just talked about.
yeah,
But yeah, I do kind of want to pick that whole of self divinity thing because topic, not thing, it is a topic. But yeah, because you mentioned Brahma and Native American how like Native Americans kind of viewed that as well a little bit in your book. But that whole topic, yeah, it seems like I guess and to kind of avoid religion and stuff too much. But no, also, so I agree with you in that. Yeah, that whole how Native Americans and Brahma and that whole like Hinduism, um, that whole divinity of self, individualism of is I like the way you intertwine that in there, and it how you kind of went through that. It was interesting just to see kind of like how you were able to take all these different realms. Is that the way to put it? And put them out to make it digestible to also help people kind of think about it. Because I think that is also agree like that is a big process for people of being able to figure out their help them progress with that divinity. Sorry, no.
well, I can piggyback off that if you
Yeah,
want.
yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I try to do in my book, one of the things I struggled with a lot with writing this book
Mhm.
is the knowing that this is going to be published, right?
Yeah,
So it's no longer within the safe domain of my personal world, right? I'm
yeah,
putting this out into the shared collective world. And that world is full of opinions and beliefs and perspectives, um, and attitudes.
yeah,
Um, and and so what I wanted to make sure I was doing with this book is that I wanted to make sure that I was writing this from my perspective and that it was clear to the reader that this is how I'm experiencing these different things that I'm bringing up, right? Um, and there's a couple of reasons I was trying to be very careful with that in my writing and in my storytelling. Is one is that we live in a globalized world in which we have access to nearly everything, right?
yeah,
And
pretty
knowledge
much.
systems. And that access, though, is because it's so wide, it's not very deep, right?
Yeah,
In order to go deep with any of these knowledge systems or what would you call them? Epistemologies, ways of seeing.
mhm.
You have to really dive into the source from which those knowledge systems derive from. And that's an embodied experience. Yeah,
Right.
that takes a physical sort of complexity that isn't always accessible and attainable for everyone. And so, I'm very like aware that like I'm bringing in knowledge systems that I have explored on my own, or I've been introduced through academia, or have read about. Um, but they're not mine. I wasn't raised with them. I don't have any credibility. I don't have I haven't really studied them. Really, the only way that I'm sharing this stuff is the only way I can share it
Mhm.
is through my own thinking of it. And
Yeah,
and I think why like to go back to what you're saying about like I think what's the question of like why is that worth putting out in the world, right? And
yeah,
I think what it does is it that process of writing that and putting it into a narrative and trying to connect these different ideas and experiences is it allows the reader to have a framework for them to analyze and reflect on their own experiences and knowledge systems that they've been introduced to.
Yeah.
And I try as an educator, I want to encourage, people to not I want to encourage inclusivity, right? I
Yeah.
want people to feel invited into different ways of thinking, different ways of knowing, different ways of seeing, and and to do so because I want people to expand their minds. Um,
Mhm.
and and I fully recognize that like my book is, you know, exists within the constraints of my life and what I have already experienced.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so I write about this dream I have,
Yeah.
and in the dream, I'm told, at the very end of the dream, now you must meditate on Brahma, and
Yeah.
I'm and the story goes, I wake up and I'm like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that word is. I'm sort of playing it off my tongue and
Yeah.
repeating it and be like, you can't forget this word because it's there's something just like
Yeah, something's connecting here. It's like try and keep it, yeah, play it connected with us a little bit. Yeah.
yeah, and so and so what I do, right, is I write a little bit about Brahma, right?
Yeah.
Um, and my book is full of things like that, right? I dive into a lot of the Hawaiian epistemology,
Yeah.
and the gods and goddesses and the stories, um, and many different sort of cultural frameworks. But it's kind of tricky business to write about such things because I have to make sure that like I am not an authority
Mhm.
on these topics, and this is not what this book is. It's not a book for people to learn necessarily about
That
these knowledge systems, but I'm hoping that it's a way. It's just an access point of
yeah.
like, hey, these worlds, these knowledge systems exist out there, and they're worth building your own relationship to. And
Yeah.
and here are some things to consider.
Mhm. Yeah, that was a great read with that because yeah, you introduce so much of these different of the epistemologies.
Yeah, epistemologies. Yeah,
Epistemologies, thank you. Yeah, so you introduce a lot of those, um, and it was just interesting seeing you explain them so well. Of be like, here's what they are, and you can definitely tell like you have an educator background because, and it makes sense now like how you wrote it is because you do see a little bit of, like yourself struggle with these various concepts or play with these concepts a little bit. Um, and so, yeah, it was interesting to see you go along with all that. Um, and then being able to relate all the different stories and these different beliefs and essentially your own personal journey and development.
mm-hmm.
Working through that while you're helping others. It works really well. I think a lot of people will relate to that actually, being able to see these topics introduced and then see you yourself kind of chew on it a little bit and
Yeah,
work through it. I think it works really well. Kind of want to go back to the whole educator side of things now and seeing how pretty much first we'll start with the general question. What kind of advice or would you want to give to any, not just young people, but just like anyone trying to go work through that as well of self-discovery? And then we'll start with that, and then we'll work. Yeah, start with that.
yeah. Um, Yeah, great question. And it's actually like the great thing is that if someone is already at the point where they're asking themselves like, what can I like, how can I get to a point in my life where I'm feeling, you know, grounded and solid, you know, in who I am, and I
Yeah.
have you know, my constitution, you know, someone who's ready, you know, wants that desire for themselves, right? Has this, that's a really great, that's a really great sign, right? So a lot of like the past experience I've had is I'm working with adolescents, I'm working with young adults that they're not even at that stage,
Oh, okay.
right? Um, and so that's harder work. It's harder. So, but to go back to your question and to answer your question,
Yeah, no worries.
what I would say is there's already a map for this, right? This map has been drawn. Um, and I'm going to use this analogy because I am I'm a visual person, and I think that I think that we are visual people in the sense that that's our evolution. We we are highly visual. We are a highly visual species, and and there's a number of adaptations that support that. But there's already a map. There's already a map that's been drawn, and like every map, um, you have a map on its own does nothing, right?
Yeah.
You have, in order to use the map, use the tool to find what it is that you're looking for, or to go to the destination that you are attempting to arrive at. You have to orient the map to where you are, right?
Yeah.
And so that takes having to figure out it, to look around your surroundings, right? You have to know where you are in space, and then you have to connect that with your map. And oftentimes, what you do is you find some kind of landmark. You find something that is represented on the map, that is also represented in your your physical space. So when I say that this map has already been drawn, has already been created, what I mean is that humans have been telling the story, the mythology of human progress and development forever.
Yeah.
It exists across all cultures. It spans across all time, and these stories are the map. Okay. And so what I always suggest to people is, if you are interested in finding for yourself, you know, how can you work through your own personal journey? How can you rise to the occasion? Look towards the human stories. Look towards the ancient past. And I talk about this a lot in my book, and I refer to the Hawaiian epistemology because that was my experience, and I was physically oriented within that epistemology because I was living and working on these faraway atolls that were literally a physical map to a mythological origin, and so you know, when I was saying, like, for example, like some people already know, like, I'm ready, I want to go on this, and other people have no idea. That itself is a mythological duality that, you know, people have been aware of for hundreds and thousands of years, and Joseph Campbell has done a lot of work in bringing that duality to light, within our, you know, within a very large audience. He's a very popular writer of comparative cultural studies surrounding mythology, and that duality is these stories exist in movies we've grown up with, Disney movies, right?
Oh yeah.
You just take one, Pinocchio, right?
Oh yeah. Pinocchio.
Um, or what?
Pinocchio's a good one. Yeah.
What did you say? Did you
Uh,
have a?
oh no, I was gonna. I don't know. I was gonna say. I was gonna. Oh man. I was gonna say like Snow White or something, but no, Pinocchio's a lot better. Pinocchio.
No, Snow White. Oh, Snow White's incredible.
Yeah. Right.
All of these, see, these are contemporary stories, but
Mhm.
the mapping of these stories, the structure of the stories, you strip away the color, you strip away the animation, and you're left with a narrative, and that arc of those characters, those came from somewhere else. Those have been passed down through cultures forever, right? They have an origin point, and that origin point is a mystery, right?
Yeah.
But and so that's why I say you have to go to the ancient past. So you have this duality about two, you have people that are ready, right? They're ready to answer the call, right? And then you have people that they're not ready, right?
Yeah.
And but either way, either way, you end up at the same point.
Oh
And this
yeah.
is sort of the beauty, the cyclical nature, the phenomenon of how life seems to work. Um,
Yeah.
there is and we can get into this more, in terms of we can bring in death and what that the significance of death to life development, and how that plays a huge role in initiating oneself into the next stage of life.
Yeah, and we can dig into that too, because yeah, no, that's an important part of that. Because I think no matter what side of that duality you're on, like you're talking about, like I think both sides will recognize that eventually.
Yeah.
So, would you say,
It's either you're gonna make it happen for yourself, you're gonna create an experience for yourself that has this death component, this confrontation with death, or it's eventually gonna find you, right?
yeah,
There's no avoiding it, right?
yeah,
It's just a matter of your life and where it takes you, and there's a fate component, right?
oh yeah, like yeah, there's a point where yeah, like it's gonna happen. And so when you're working with the groups of kid, adolescents, and young adults, um, did you ever bring that duality kind of like when you were working in those group sessions, or did you try and work with them the best you can, or how did all that work?
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So one of the things I write about is a specific ceremony
Mhm.
that I would facilitate and lead for these students.
Mhm.
And this was a particularly like um, poignant ceremony. Is designed to create and trigger a response,
Mhm.
from a deeper place within the individual.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and the idea behind that is was in terms of this duality of like,
Mhm.
are you ready? Are you ready to answer the call? Um,
Yeah.
is that I very well, at this point in the program, the
Mhm.
students would they would have already been in the program for a number of weeks, basically getting acclimated, learning things about personal responsibility, and how to like take care of your basic needs,
Yeah.
how to create a structure in your day, that you can build on incrementally so that you can take on more things in life, stuff like that.
Oh,
uh,
okay.
and then they get to this part where they would be swept away from that, right? They'd be
Yeah.
taken out of that environment that they had started to build some familiarity and comfort and competence in, right? And as soon as that part comes, as soon as they're like, I got a hang of this, you take them out. And this isn't to be cruel. This is to model a human system that has been observed and has existed across many different cultures. It's not just that; it's also in nature. Yeah. So we are nature, and it's sometimes hard to look at humans as a natural system because we see ourselves, we're so self-aware that tends to blind us from our own nature. Um, we see ourselves through a cultural lens or a culturally relative lens, a sociological lens, and we start to imagine that it's all sort of constructed and invented by humans, and we conflate it with politics and power and control and but we forget that we have survived as a species within a larger natural system that has its constraints, and those constraints craft, shape can any living system, and the adaptations that system has to continue to exist. It's an existential adaptation, and for humans, we have our own developmental stages that make us are characteristic to Homo sapiens, and one of them is a pretty delayed adolescence period. We take a long time to develop into adulthood, and to the point where we've evolved to need a cultural sort of kick out of the bird's nest.
Yeah.
To make that transition happen. It can't just happen biologically. It can't just happen, phenomenologically. There's a complexity, a cultural complexity. And so for adolescents, what's needed is there needs to be a lot of push of an encouragement, that in order to make that leap into adulthood. And so what has been observed and what now has been designed in these therapy programs is what is called the betwixt and between, or it's the threshold. It's neither here nor there. It's a space that you create that is not childhood and it's not adulthood.
Like a weird.
It's a metamorphosis stage. It's a in between. It doesn't exist. It is outside of existence, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we as program guides would
Kind of.
symbolically create that space, right?
Yeah.
And that's what stories are. That's all stories are, right? Stories, when you sit down and you watch Pinocchio, or you sit down and you watch Snow White, what are you doing? You are leaving the physical space that you exist in, and you're entering a place that's neither here nor there. It doesn't exist, yet it's so powerful enough that you are connecting your psyche to the story and to those characters, and you're following them along their journey. And you're actually integrating that on this subconscious level that you perhaps are not even aware of, right? Mm-hmm. So all it is doing that, but actually creating a physical space for it.
But that makes a lot of sense now. So super appreciate the explanation. It's probably good for them to have something to relate to and have something physical to work with, because I imagine a lot of them they prefer to work with their hands and work through stuff. So
it's the adolescent's identity, right? Yeah. If you think about it, there's something that's called the little death. Yeah.
Okay.
And the little death is often mirrored with birth.
Yeah.
As phenomenons, there's a give and a take, and that's part of what Brahma is the reigns over this world, encapsulated between birth and death.
Yeah.
And so the little death is the stage of adolescence.
Mm-hmm.
It's a giving up of childhood and a birthing or a gifting into adulthood, right? So even that identity or that stage, you are neither this, you're neither that. All that is, it is defined by an existential I don't know what I am anymore. I no longer feel like a child. I don't want to be a child. I want to have power. I want to be independent. But
Yeah.
you don't have that yet, right? You
Yeah.
don't have it legally, you don't have it experientially, you don't have it biologically, right? So you're neither child, you're neither adult, but you're trying to reach to be an adult, right? And so that's like we should be highly cognizant of that as a society and that life developmental stage in terms of what the adolescence is experiencing, as their identity of trying to grasp for something,
Yeah. You mean,
and realizing it's okay. Like you are neither this, you are living in a very special stage of life, and it's amazing and it's beautiful, and we should be educating in more in depth of what that stage is.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think a lot of people need that kind of situation, and not just kind of people going and attending those and then coming back, because you can always seem to tell like they something sparked in them a little bit. So it's interesting to always see both workers like you to help them out, counselors, guidance counselors, as well as people that attend. There's always some story that comes out of that, and it seems like no one comes out the same about that. And it's cool to see people grow and kind of get their footing with that kind of begin that journey. And sometimes those events can almost be as traumatic as like how as you probably saw with something like the albatrosses, where they would kick their birds out of the nest kind of thing, and he's like, well, we're gonna have to adapt, or it's like you just
talk about albatross.
Huh?
Can we talk about
this dude. I want to. I'm not gonna lie. I love the albatross section of the book. That was like those guys were adorable.
Yeah, for those who don't know, I used to work around albatross. I worked on a remote atoll, which is a type of island, and the atoll is called Kure Atoll, also called Holanipu. Part of the Hawaii archipelago, and it's a wildlife sanctuary. It's part of a marine national monument. It's protected. It's a wildlife refuge, and so it's full of marine birds. There's many different species that nest on the island, and one of the most abundant is the Laysan albatross. And so, I used to work out there. I did 2 stints as a habitat restorationist, basically like a technician job for conservation, just trying to restore the island's habitat to make it suitable for wildlife to inhabit and use as a source for reproduction, but primarily because marine birds feed forage or fish in the ocean. And so so when I say there's a lot of birds, I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of birds crammed on. Birds don't need much space when it comes to nesting, and albatross live in colonies. So they give each other a couple feet of space between their nests. And so, if you run the numbers, you have a 190, 200 acre island, which is about half the size of Central Park. And, you put a couple feet between each nest, and, the numbers are going to be up in the, 50, 60,000. And so I basically lived and breathed, bird life, marine bird life for 6 months at a time. Isolated on these islands. And so, of course, this is a big portion of my book takes place on this atoll, and I use it as it's basically plays the role of my rites of passage, sort of neither here nor there experience, and it was perfect because I physically went to an atoll that no one can go to except for this way. It's completely cut off from civilization except for our satellite email. And I'm just living out there and working. And, so albatross are just a beautiful species.
They're pretty big birds too, right? Like,
Yeah, they have a huge wingspan. I have about a 6 foot arm span, and their Laysan are about 6 feet wingspan, if not more. And yeah, they're very big. They are a very like animated bird, so they dance when they're courting. And they have all these different dance moves that they do. They shake their head, they preen their feathers, they stick their head way up to the sky and sort of give a salute to the heavens. And that's their way of courting. And so just imagine that happening all around you during a certain season, when the albatross come back from foraging on the ocean, all of the better half of the summer and fall. And then they come back to find a partner. And if they don't have a partner yet, because one thing they do is common is they mate for life.
okay, yeah.
And all right, so that means they have a single partner their whole lives.
Yeah.
But there's examples of albatross changing partners, or it's not a set rule. It's just the a priori behavior. But they're just and they're a curious creature. It's very different. Like one of these things about the albatross, which I think a lot of people have, people's relationship to albatrosses is based on some sort of tropes, I guess. Like the hanging albatross. Like people often associate albatross with like a burden, like a symbology of a burden.
Oh yeah, kind of like
from the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The epic poem. About a mariner who, like, I think he ends up like shooting an albatross that had been like following them, and so it's thought of as like this burden. He has to wear the albatross around his head because the consequence of killing this albatross. But what is fascinating about albatross is that they go through a neither here nor there threshold rites of passage experience that I don't think I could compare to another species. Maybe it's out there, but what they do is when they leave their nest, they don't get kicked out. What actually happens is the adults just leave. Right? They're just like, we can't support you anymore. We are starving half to death. We're going back out there. We're going to feed ourselves. Good luck to you. You should be good. Can't teach you how to fly. Sorry, it's not part of my job description as a parent.
Right.
So best of luck. Never see you again. Yeah. And so then that fledgling is at this ultimatum where it's like, okay, I can either continue to stay relatively safe on this island that is all my existence. I don't know anything else except for this island, but I will surely die because there is no food here for me. And my parents were bringing me food, as often as they could. Or I can spread these wings and I can attempt to fly, which I've never done. I don't know how to do that. I just have some impulses and instincts of like flapping these big things and maybe getting a running start. Maybe something about the wind, like I feel this wind. I think I'm supposed to use that somehow. Right. And I can just take off and I have a sense, I have an instinct, I have a compelling reason to go out there. But, I don't actually know what's out there. No one's told me anything. No one's transferred knowledge into my brain, except for some dark sort of instinct that is embedded in my, genetic code. And so the albatross takes off, and if it successfully is able to fly, if it's successfully able to lift up into the air and become, now enter the realm of the heavens, the skies, and then it goes off and it journeys into the great vast world of the ocean. And there that albatross stays for many, many years.
Yeah, it was like,
I forget how many. I want to say like up to 6 years, right?
it was like,
And before they ever come back to land,
mhm.
before they ever land again. So albatross they're not just not out on the ocean, flying and they stop and rest and just like sit on the ocean to take a break.
No,
They're flying the whole time
okay.
for 6 years, right? And and then they get some for whatever reason they get some instinct, some compelling reason
I'm back.
to be like, what, I'm gonna come. I think I'm ready to have my own kids. Yeah, I think I'm ready to do this whole adult thing. I think I'm ready to contribute to my species. Right?
Yeah,
We call that contributing to society. Um, and so yeah,
yeah.
and then it heads back and it knows exactly where its home was. It goes all the way back, and not only that, it can find like within a very uh,
Small
very accurate, yeah, like where like its former nest site. And then
Oh,
it pops down and it starts doing its dances. Doesn't really know what they're doing, but they kind of watch and observe and get a hold of it. And if they're any good at it, they'll find a mate. And then their adult life has started. But they go through those 6 years of solitude,
yeah.
right? Um, even as a very social creature, even as a creature that like us are fairly monogamous. There's a lot I found I could relate to the albatross. And when I realized their life stages and life cycles, and because I was so immersed in their lives, right, I got to know them. I got to know them. And because I got to know them, I got to know something about being human. And this is another aspect of my book that I was trying to relate of like, why is it important to have an interrelationship with across species? What is to learn about yourself and your species through other species? What is the consequence when we stop doing that? Right? What does that do to human systems, human living, when we no longer live within the context of an other than human world? And that to me is a scary future, right? And we're already pretty far into it, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, we are. I was just thinking a little bit like how, how we just separated ourselves from the rest of nature pretty immensely. And yeah, it is a scary thought to just kind of like, just being able, just separating ourselves as a species so vast, so far away. Like, I could only imagine, like, seeing the similarity between like how the albatross was, and then comparing that to what you kind of see in like human society, or I guess how we are as a species. It is interesting to kind of see how much as a species we've changed while they've more or less kind of remained consistent.
But you're right. We've taken a leap with our cultural evolution, right?
Yeah,
And I like, I'm very biased. My intuition pump tells me that we as a collective species are missing something. We're missing out on something when we aren't in tune with natural systems.
yeah,
And so I often try to defend that. And I think the place where I see it the most, it's not like, I think what I worry about the most is, when I think about us as humans, I'm fairly optimistic, as a species. I think like we we are just so good at coming up with solutions to catastrophic problems that we create. We create the problems, but man, are we pretty creative in finding solutions. And I love that about. I think it's fascinating. That's not where I see the issue as much with the disconnect. I think what I see is all those who suffer that experience a lot of suffering, especially when it comes to mental health.
Yeah.
I really am talking about in the context of an individual, and what how hard an individual's life is, and how those struggles, that suffering consumes someone to the point that they are not living. They're not able to enjoy life, no matter like what you're born into, no matter what hardships you're born into, no matter how unlucky, no matter, how much the cards are stacked against you. There is something to be found universally within being alive, and the gift of being alive. And what I think for me, and I personally discovered, right? I discovered that sort of that spirituality, that bliss, that knowing oneself journey, by immersing myself in nature and connecting to something, beyond the sort of walls of my own human, you know, perspective.
Right. You like trying to expand yourself outside of that realm. And I think that's super important.
Well, I saw albatross. I saw so many adolescent albatross dying. Right.
Yeah.
So like, it just, what it does is it shifts your perspective. It shifts your mind state on how you are viewing your own suffering, your own attitudes, right?
Yeah.
It knocks you out of a cycle or pattern of thinking, an attitude of life. And so, like, for me, I saw so much suffering on this island. I saw so much death. The infant mortality of many species is extremely high, right? It took humans only until like post-industrial revolution to solve the infant mortality issue with our species. That's not that long ago, right?
No.
And like to watch something die over and over and over again. Some people say like that builds an insensitivity. Sort of like like I don't know what a good comparison is, without being too controversial, but but for me, what happened is I became more and more sort of intimate with that side of life, the stuff that we avoid because it hurts, because it's hard to see, right? Because it fills your nostrils and floods you with panic, right? I became closer and closer and closer to that, to the point where I learned how to invite it, embrace it, and integrate it into my own life, my own suffering, my own relationship to, the dark side of life, which is death. And so and have reverence for it. And so that's the title of my book is Return to Po. And Po is is a Hawaiian word that I've appropriated. And it means night, darkness, obscurity. Yeah, go ahead.
I was saying, this is probably a question better for probably a little bit after you're done explaining stuff. But I like the fact that you also add like the antithesis of it, like I'm going to butcher the word. It's ao.
Oh, yeah, ao. And yeah. I'm not good at pronouncing it either. So we're both learning.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. But sorry to interrupt. Yeah, no, I was again, I got excited that that you go into both, like this whole topic you're going into about getting into Po and all this stuff, and as well as mentioning that and anyways, but
no, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, and ao is the counterpart. So if Po is night, and darkness, then Ao is day and light, right? Yeah, and so we exist within Ao. We exist within the day, within light. Yeah, so the realm of Ao in terms of time is
Mhm.
life, right? It's the time that exists between birth and death. Yeah. And then Po is the time that surrounds that, right?
Yeah.
It's all around it. There's it is all the emptiness. It's all the space um, beyond it's the unknown, right? So if you think of like the horizon, right? So
Yeah.
all is everything that you can see, right? If you're looking at the horizon, but then everything starts to the sky comes down, and then you can't see what's beyond the horizon. So the unknown, it's obscure, but you can move towards it, right? And I'll reveal the stuff. It actually emerges from the darkness, right? From Po. Or, when the sun goes down, right? Then you're in the realm of Po. Everything's dark. And you can and the universe reveals itself. This world outside of the earth, which is life because it supports life, right?
Yeah.
And so when I'm trying to when I was trying to think of my title, it came so quickly. I don't even know if I thought about it. I can't even remember the process. I was just like, this is all I know. This is all I can think of. So I'll just go with that. And I'm really glad I did, because what I'm trying to do with that title is it's a we is returning to a relationship with Po, returning to a confrontation, to a valuing of the night and and all that comes from that, in terms of how we live our lives in all. How are we informed? What is informing our life beyond that which we can see?
Right.
And so, for me, that became a very
Intimate kind of.
yeah, because I went through this like building of Paul by oh yeah. So the other thing is the title is also based off of going living and working on this atoll. And
Oh, yeah.
and the atoll exists it's demarcated within the Hawaiian archipelago. The chain of islands is split into two realms, right? The day and the night. And it's done so based on a an alignment of the sun. Yeah, so you know how we have like the equator line, and we have the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. So those lines demarcate the furthest north and the furthest south that the sun travels, or that are across the hemisphere.
Yeah.
At different parts of the year, right? So, right, longest day of the year is in the summer, the solstice, and so that's the furthest north that the sun travels, right? And so, if you think about it in terms of this like framing of night and day, you can imagine that anything north of that line is outside the realm of sun and light, day, and that's the realm of Po, right?
Yeah.
And so north of that line is the Tropic of Cancer. And so if you drew a line across the Tropic of Cancer across the Hawaiian archipelago, it would split it in half. And you would have the main Hawaiian Islands south of that line, and then you'd have the northwest Hawaiian Islands north of that line. So north, it's darker, right? And so that's in the orientation of Hawaii, from the perspective of living in Hawaii. And so that's the realm of Po. And so the story is also about me returning to a physical place called Po, right?
Yeah.
Where Kure Atoll Holaniku exists.
And it's just interesting to see that your whole process and see you wrestle with everything, with like, you know, up to that point. And then when you finally reach that, it is a really amazing conclusion.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I tried to like, that was it. Like the conclusion is, I think that's where, when I said the timeline is kind of vague, I think what I was referring to is that it's all centered, like this whole story is centered around the death of my brother, my younger brother.
Yeah.
And I start the book off, right, with that. And I end the book with that. And so that's vague might not be the right word, but the way that I structured it is like a circle, right?
Yeah.
The beginning, it begins and ends with the same time setting of time, you know, in the terms of the timeline.
Yeah.
In the middle is what happened before my brother's death.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And that's like, it's not, I'm not obvious with it, and I don't want to be. Then that's the vagueness, right? Mm-hmm. I'm trying to steer us out of this way of examining our life linearly, right? It's just, it's not how the universe works. It's not, there is a past, present, future, but you know, in terms of how we dominantly observe our world, but when it comes to like, it's not the best way to apply to your own development.
Right. Yeah.
It's much better to apply a cyclical model to one's own development. And so I try to stay away from that in the narrative, you know, the narrative structure of this book. And the only risk of that is just creating confusion, right? Where it's like, oh, his brother died and then he went off to the atolls.
Yeah, like later, like how does that work? But
yeah,
yeah. So there was an interesting little bit of like, I guess, like side note you have to kind of pay attention to with all that, because you have to be aware that maybe it's kind of like a flashback kind of thing. I like the fact that you mentioned that he does die in the beginning, and then in the middle, you kind of circle it to, you know, your memories of him, and then they come finally circle back around to you working through all that and all your good memories. With mentioning your brother, you and your brother are both pretty close, from the sounds of it from your book. If you want to talk about that, or
sure. And so that's one of the things that what I write about is grappling with the relationship I had with my brother. Mm-hmm. It's funny. Like if there was like one word to describe this book, it'd be grappling. Grappling. It's just funny because I was just thinking I play D&D, and
I
have this character that is one of his best features is he's really good at grappling.
Oh, and nice.
It's not that kind of grappling. Like it's a very different kind of grappling we're talking about here. So this book, the big motivation to write this book was the event of the death of my brother. And, you know, that event, you know, compelled me to do some confronting, and to, you know, things that we naturally want to avoid doing. And that's a lot of that is, you know, things like questioning. Did I do enough? Was I a good brother? You know, was I there for him? And I wanted to approach these questions not from a place of victimizing or self-blaming or creating some kind of like, you know, going down some deep and dark road, but instead as to invite them in with everything else, right? It's like, you get a seat at the table too, right?
Yeah,
like we're all here around the table of grieving, and you know, everyone gets their slice. Everyone gets just as much attention, you know, and so this book was kind of like, you know, in a sense was my grieving process. It was very much a sort of a project uh, existing within that, and so my relationship, my brother, died in an accident, drowning accident, and quite young. He was only 20 when it happened, and
Yeah.
I'm 7 years older than him. And he was the youngest of me and I have three older sisters who I'm also very close with.
Oh,
And so my brother and I were the closest in age, and so we had a sort of closeness there. We were also both, boys, and so we related in that sense too. We grew up sharing a room together, and I was kind of his, like, his contact to the world, because I wasn't an adult, right?
yeah.
And so there's that relating, right? He's another kid, but he's older, he's wiser, he's more powerful than me. And so I played, a significant role, in his life growing up. But also there was a big age difference. 7 years is significant, and I grew up, and it was time for me to leave the nest. And I went off to college, and then I went off to Hawaii, right? I went off on my own journey. And so one of the things I grappled with was, you know, he and I, actually ended up like having, having different personalities, right? Similar, very, very, very similar interests in the world. We very, very similar passions, but quite different demeanors.
Really? Okay.
And 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 the space between our relationship that grew with the physical space of me living abroad, and created a distance that I think, like, when I look back at it, there's some pain there. There's some wishing that I had been around more and been closer to him during his adolescence period, during his period of reaching adulthood. And so, all of a sudden there's this example, this very intimate example of how adulthood is not guaranteed.
Yeah, I think a lot of people kind of take that for granted because it's like, oh, we'll make it to to that kind of certain age, but it's a process to really get to that level of like that physical and mental maturity. It's a whole I think a lot of people kind of take that for granted now. So it's just and especially with kind of like how you explaining explaining your brother's process and your grieving process as well. It's a very humbling reminder of just kind of like how that reality is for how that reality is.
Yeah, it's nothing. It's an experience that no one ever wants to have, but also, like, it is the fact of life. You will lose someone. You will lose more than one person. You will lose many people in your life, and if you successfully get to live to a ripe old age, you will eventually lose everybody, right? And so there's something there then to pay attention to. To me, what it means is that we should, because that's inevitable, because it's going to happen, and because we don't get to choose how it happens or when it happens, we should be doing everything within our community and our culture to foster a relationship to that, right?
Yeah.
And we don't. I don't think we do. I think we have rituals, we have protocols that we enact when a death event occurs in our life, right?
Mm.
Memorials, gatherings, but do we actually have have a something that allows one to know how to move through process of grieving and mourning, and to to incorporate that going forward in life, right?
Right.
And you know, I I think sadly, you know, we we don't, and we're lucky. We're lucky if we have that for ourselves, because you know it makes life, it makes one able to continue to face life.
Yeah,
Um,
it makes it a little more bearable for at least the individual. But yeah, in terms of making having like a whole group connect, probably a better way to say it, disconnect of having like group help with that whole
Mhm.
process.
It is such a group. You're so right. It should not be done in a vacuum.
No, yeah. Trying to wrap, I guess, wrap
Yeah.
things up a little bit. Sorry. But I guess better way to say is like to better come like full circle though. You wrap things up really well in the book though, where you see people when people read your book, like they see you grapple with this, they see you like work through it, and they see people the fact like this you wanted to help other people as well and trying to figure out how to working through your own issue, working through your own, I guess, struggles and finding all these other things out, as well as being able to try and teach that to others as well in a group setting and help them kind of work through things. It makes for a really amazing read, and you can definitely tell like there's a lot of passion in that, and you can definitely tell like you've seems like you've been through, you can definitely see all the folks in the detail of like your thought process of all that. And it seems to come through really well though.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it, and I'm really, it's nice to have a conversation with someone, a discussion
mhm.
about it. You know, someone who's read it. Because I just published it not that long ago, and I'm sort of anxiously waiting to hear back from folks that in my life that are have supported me and purchased the book. And um, it's this has been such a like amazing for me to be able to have this discussion with you, because it draws it draws out that passion. And I think it's like it's and hearing how you are processing what you've read, and how you're sharing that, and what that inspires me to talk about, right?
Yeah,
um it kind of breathes life into the book in a way.
it
uh,
does. Yeah,
and I'm just really appreciative of that. I'm really happy that we've now spent the last 2 hours really
yeah,
sort of diving in.
yeah. No, it's a great time. Yeah, no, I was looking at the clock too. I was like, man, we just
Yeah.
let's bind through. But no, it's honestly just but no, it's such it really is like that a solid of it's a short book, but there's so much like really great genuine material that
Mm.
um like that I can definitely connect to, and a lot of people like I think um that are curious about environmental side of things, educator. There's so much material that you put in here. It's amazing.
Mm.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah, for a little book, right? It sure packs a punch.
it really does, and you did um, a really good job with that of putting it in there. And but I guess just to kind of end things out here, I guess just kind of open the floor to you if you have any more closing remarks or any shout outs or anything that you want to add on your end of um
Oh, well, I mean,
or
if folks are interested in reading it, if they're curious what else we haven't talked about that, we haven't spoiled for them,
yeah.
the book is available on Amazon. You can just, find it, through the title, Return to Poe. And yeah, I suppose that's it on my end.
Okay.
Kyle, we gotta get back out there and run again soon, and
Yeah, we
meet up
yeah,
with Rob, who is how we both met,
yeah.
through our mutual friend Rob.
the Mr.
Shout out to him.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we can talk about that outside of this, but yeah, dude, I am definitely itching to get back out there. So yeah, let's try to figure something out. Hey everybody, so hope you enjoyed the interview. I had a lot of fun making it, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. Hopefully I get to do more of these kinds of interviews in the future, and please check out my friend's book on Amazon. The link is in the description below. Also, you can follow him on Instagram over at the Eco Psychology Project on Instagram. Check that out. So thanks again for watching, and also check me out on Twitch and Patreon, and please subscribe to the channel as I try to do more running videos, vlogging, and these kind of like interviews with people more often. So again, check out my Patreon, it's also called Chuck D's, my Instagram called ChuckD's94, as well as the Twitch, which is also called Chuck D's. And please subscribe as well. Hit the ring, hit the bell, get that little notification. That'd be much appreciated. Thank you. And all my social links will be in the description below, just in case for you. Thank you.